Welcome to Blueprint to Billions, Leverage and Legacy in Apartments.
Welcome back to Blueprint to Billions, where legal strategy meets real estate scale. HUD attorney and multifamily housing strategist Terry Bruner has spent his career guiding developers, nonprofits, and investors through complex housing transactions with the focus on building both legacy and leverage. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're looking at how nonprofits can compete and succeed in a space often dominated by private capital. This is doing well and doing good, how nonprofits can compete in HUD-based development. Terry, sir, welcome back.
Good to be back, Evan.
Awesome. Okay, so when nonprofits come to you wanting to get into HUD-backed development, what's usually holding them back? Is it fear? Is it capacity? Is it lack of legal know-how? Is it a combination of all that?
Well, so most nonprofits, at least the ones that I'm familiar with and have worked with, they have some basic sense of legal framework. Usually, there's like a general counsel or maybe an external counsel where they solicit advice, or maybe there's even someone on retainer, if not on staff. And we're fortunate to perform some of those functions for some nonprofits. So my experience is that most of them have a foundational threshold kind of knowledge. But what they lack really is the infrastructure to really take a deal and move it forward, to advance it. So what I find with most of our nonprofit clients, particularly those who are in this space, they're not all that well capitalized. So the equity piece, or just having cash on hand sufficiently to do a deal like this, is a problem. And then secondly, if they really do need a point person internally who can sort of act as a de facto development head, like construction development head, it's very hard for most nonprofits to employ a person or people or a team like that. And so you run into situations then where they really are, kind of stringing things together just to try to make it go. So it's more of an infrastructure problem, and probably a liquidity equity problem than it is kind of either a know-how or a legal problem. And that's not to say that they know everything, but most of them have good, basic knowledge of what needs to happen. They just don't have necessarily the bandwidth or the resources to facilitate those deals.
What kind of HUD programs or deal structures are actually accessible to a nonprofit sponsor specifically?
The great thing is, which most people don't know, is most HUD programs are available for nonprofits, particularly when it comes to constructing new housing. Most of those programs, including the kind of the banner program, the 221D4 program, nonprofits are eligible to access those programs as well. And sometimes with a little bit less stringent requirements than what would be so for a for-profit developer. But again, it doesn't remove the need for equity. It doesn't remove the need for all of the other compliance pieces that any developer would need to have. Historically there was, and they still exist in some, stripped down, modified way, but there were two programs primarily that nonprofits took advantage of. One was called the 811 program. The other was the 202 program. And like I said, they still exist. The 811 program was mostly for people with disabilities. So you had a lot of nonprofits who specialized in special needs folks in building housing that was supportive for that population. The 811 program was geared to them. The 202 program was geared more towards the elderly, the traditionally elderly, like based on age. And so those were grant programs as opposed to loan programs, which made them very attractive. What we've seen in the years following, kind of not the shuttering, but the downsizing of those programs, we've seen more public-private kind of partnerships where nonprofits will partner with a for-profit developer on, for example, renovating old public housing that maybe a city's housing authority had. That's called the RAD program that HUD has, and it's quite a robust program that's still going today. And then we've seen a lot of tax credit deals that are out there, low-income housing tax credits, new market tax credits, that a lot of nonprofits will try to access with for-profit developers to try to get a leg up on some of these things. And then in terms of the traditional HUD programs, you often find a lot of developers, or I should say some developers who are nonprofits, really trying to put age restrictions on who can live in a building, but just accessing
Mm.
HUD money to do that. Because here's the thing, and I want to be very clear about this, not to go off onto a policy deep end, but we don't build affordable housing, and we don't build a lot of housing now in the way that we did 60 years ago. There's a reason why we're facing a housing crunch in the country right now. And a lot of it has to do, I think, with the fact that we just don't build at scale anymore. Now, there are all kinds of
Wow.
reasons why that's the case. But particularly, if you look at the population base, a lot of baby boomers are aging, really fast. A lot of Gen Xers are, getting to that point now where they're going to start aging. And then, it's a cascade effect. But if we're not careful, because so much of the housing stock that we do have, particularly on the affordable housing side, which a lot of seniors would access, for example, a lot of that stock is old, and it's being depleted, and it's not
Mm.
being kept up with in terms of maintenance. And so we're going to run, head first into a crisis of some sort, because the population, an aging population, is going to need some place to stay, and it's probably going to need some other need. So I think the only way you do that is through leveraging the government resources in some way, because it's a public need. How that happens, I don't know, but I'm just saying this in terms of nonprofits have a space to fill and a role to fill, probably in a way they can do so, probably in a way that they can do so more than a for-profit developer in some respects.
Hmm. Competing with private developers can be intimidating for some people. How can nonprofits position themselves as equally credible partners?
Well, I reframe the question slightly different, or
Yeah.
slightly differently. I don't think it's necessarily a competition, like us
Okay.
versus them. I think it really has more to do with how can nonprofits actually partner with for-profit entities in ways that make sense, so that where those infrastructure needs are most prevalent for nonprofits, or where the gap in terms of funding, financing, those things may exist, it probably makes a lot better use of resources to try to
Mhm.
partner with for-profit entities on some of these developments, in a way that's probably accretive to some of the for-profit developers. Usually, if you're a
Mm.
nonprofit, you get tax breaks. Like if you're a community housing development organization of some sort, there are all sorts of things that you can access in terms of financing, and levering, that you couldn't if you weren't a nonprofit. So there's an attraction, and there's an attractive feature of these things for-profit developers also. It's just about really finding the right entry points, and really about finding the right set of partnerships with the right partners who can help facilitate some of these things. And again, like I said, when it comes to public housing, when it comes to senior housing, and even in some respects when it comes to nursing homes and assisted living facilities,
Mhm.
nonprofits are poised to play a really vital role in
Mm.
constructing those kinds of developments. It's just a matter, though, of finding the right kind of partnerships with the right with the right developers on a for-profit side, who could help facilitate some of those deals and those transactions.
But speaking of roles, what role can partnerships play in helping nonprofits access deals they couldn't do alone?
Yeah, I think, I mean, as a continuation of the previous question, I think it's really just about increasing leverage. And so, to the extent that nonprofits, may be cash constrained, or may not have the same resources that a for profit developer has, if you're able to partner either with local housing authorities, or with the federal government, or with
Mm.
other for-profit developers, there probably are any number of opportunities and options that can be accessed. So I'll give you an example. There's a set of group homes that has, and those homes are, they've been around for several years, but they were refinanced into the HUD portfolio,
Right.
and they're not traditional apartments, like in the sense that they go up. They're just a series of group homes, and obviously the group home is there to support a special needs population, and they're trying to give
Mm.
them independence. They're trying to give a sense of self, and a sense again of how can they independently live, and they're organized really around this kind of central hub. So part of it actually does look like a traditional apartment complex, and then there are these adjoining houses, but they're all financed through HUD and through HUD programs. there are for-profit developers like subcontractors and contractors, general contractors, who were instrumental in helping build that complex. And it took this kind of robust set of partnerships, for example, with those general contractors to do that. But it was all made possible because there was a ready supply of money that was either given or insured by HUD, by the federal government. And those kinds of partnerships exist. You probably don't hear about them all that frequently, but they
Mhm.
exist. And I think the real challenge and probably the real opportunity going forward is going to be these kinds of entities and groups who can put together and leverage these partnerships in meaningful ways so that you can actually get towards solutions to the housing problems that we're facing. And again, this doesn't necessarily, I think the other thing is, like, when people hear nonprofit, they think, well, there's no money involved. And
Yeah.
particularly for private developers, they're saying there's no money involved. It's all about the structure. Now, a nonprofit's not going to be able to take out the same kind of money that a for-profit developer would. I mean, welcome to it being a nonprofit. But nonprofit does not mean non-revenue.
Okay.
And I think that's what we need to really understand, and just figure out what's the best way to incorporate nonprofits in deals that make sense.
Hmm. What does a nonprofit leadership team need to have in place internally before pursuing a HUD-backed project?
Well, I think you've got to have, just like in the context of any for profit developer, you've got to have something of an experienced team. So before you embark on this process, whether it's acquiring or building, you need an experienced team who actually know something about the world that they're embarking upon and what that actually means for them. Now, that doesn't mean you've got to go out and hire a bunch of expensive help. It doesn't mean that you've got to go fundamentally change your headcount if you're a nonprofit. But it does mean going out and building an external team of lawyers and architects and contractors and people, entities like that, even if it's just some minimal retainer as you work to build something, because you're going to need that in order to get substance and in order to get things moving in a way that makes sense. So
Hmm.
I have the good privilege and fortune of working with a local community development corporation, and that CDC, as it's called, also is affiliated with a church. The
Awesome.
church obviously is a nonprofit, as is the CDC, and they want to construct new apartments. And the reason that I'm there is because ultimately they want to convert the project into a HUD note or a HUD loan of some sort. And so I'm there obviously to advise and consult in some way that makes sense. They have a really wonderful general counsel or an external counsel, even though that person is not a real estate lawyer. That person is an organizational lawyer who has a sense of how all of these pieces need to fit together, but they need specialized help. That's a great example as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not saying that just because I'm involved, but they put together a team of bankers, an architect, some developers, all people who have experience building apartment complexes. And they've done that intentionally as they begin to form an entity or set of entities to attract investors and then begin the construction process. That's a good example of what we call levering up in the industry.
Hmm. What legal or strategic advice do you give nonprofits that's different from what you tell maybe a private developer?
I can't say this to a private developer all the time because they look at me crazy. But for nonprofits, mission is everything, right?
Okay.
So it has to be mission aligned. If you are, and I'm just going to give a hypothetical. So if serving a special needs population is what you do as a nonprofit, you can't then, I shouldn't say can't, it wouldn't make as much sense then for you to say, I'm going to go build, I'm going to go build 300 units that are market rate, and I'm going to build those for, young yuppies with two dogs who want to, I don't know, do whatever it is that young yuppies do. And I'm going to do that just to make money.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna do that just to make money to, like, supplement the nonprofit. I'm
Absolutely.
not going to say it's not going to work, but it's going to be much more challenging to justify that and to make that make sense for a board, which all nonprofits have. And it's also probably going to create some sort of financial issues if you're not reporting correctly. So I always say start with what you do if you're a nonprofit, and whatever is aligned to that mission, that's probably what you need to focus your activities and your attention on. That plus making sure that you're bringing along all of the stakeholders who are involved in that nonprofit all along the way. And that starts with your board and making sure that the board understands and that they're aligned, because frankly, the board is the fiduciary. So these
Hmm.
decisions need to be made at the board level, even though staff may be driving it. And so just really understanding what those pieces are and understanding how they fit together, all of that matters probably in a way foundationally that you wouldn't find necessarily for a for-profit developer.
Hmm. Can you share maybe a success story where a nonprofit punched above their weight and maybe made meaningful impact through HUD development?
Yeah. So a few years ago, during the pandemic era, during the COVID era, there's an organization that we're privileged to still represent to this day. They had a series of buildings that had old conventional loans on them. They were interested in taking advantage of the equity that the organization had built up in those buildings. And back then, interest rates were really low. They refinanced it into a HUD program, which is something that a lot of nonprofits just weren't doing, even though they could do it. And as a result of that, they were able to take out some of the equity that they recouped from that loan, and they used it to construct other units that helped other seniors. And
Hmm.
so that complex today is bigger than it was at the time we refinanced. And then
Wow.
they also had excess money left over, so they could give a few bonuses within means, obviously, and within ethical standards to their development team. But they were also more importantly, they were able to buy other land, and they're working to develop that land to expand even more senior housing in that area for folks who are potentially impacted. And I just think those kinds of like market rate, or I shouldn't say market rate, but those kinds of market based solutions that are in response to a real need, taking advantage of what's available. That's just an example of a fairly smallish organization that really saw an opportunity, and they assembled a team and they went after it and they achieved it. And now look at them.
Awesome. Awesome. A lot of nonprofit leaders and honestly a lot of lawyers as well, they worry that doing mission aligned work means sacrificing income or legitimacy. Now, the niche practice pushes back on that. Can you share why you believe lawyers don't have to choose between doing meaningful work and building a thriving independent practice?
So I'll come at this slightly differently.
Yeah.
Lawyers are if you talk to a lot of lawyers and a lot of bar associations, a lot of lawyers are in crisis.
Interesting.
Alcoholism and drug abuse rates are really high among a lot of attorneys, and even more significantly and more even more sad is that attorneys are committing suicide at fairly high rates. I
Wow.
think a lot of that springs from dissatisfaction, unhappiness, just this constant sense that you're always having to be on, and you're always having to do things maybe that you maybe used to like to do, but you don't want to do anymore. You don't want to do it
Mm,
as much. To me, that all comes from a place of mission. It all comes from a place of values. When I built the niche practice, what I was really trying to do was say, I am going to build something that gives lawyers a permission structure to operate not from the place of what they think they have to do, but from a place of what's actually possible. And so I start always with the sense of what's possible, and then I work from there. You don't have to make these Faustian bargains with yourself around
mm,
I've got to do this thing because this thing is the one thing that's going to take care of my family, and this thing is not going to do it, but I really like to do this thing. I
right.
always say, like, if you start from the thing that you like and then you work from there, work backwards from there, it's quite possible to build an entire practice, an entire business, an entire life around those things. It may take a little bit of creativity and ingenuity, but it starts with really attracting those people who need your services. And if you're trying to be all things to all people, just like our firm, for example, like I'm a HUD lawyer. If I tried to be all things to every real estate client out there, I would be so stretched thin and would have so little opportunity to really focus on the joy and the things that I want to do. that I would never build the thing that I'm actually capable of building. I think that's where we start. That's the premise from which we started the niche practice. And I think it's just building and layering on top of that. And the most successful firms that I've seen, in fact, not just in the realm of law, but the most successful people that I've seen, they are usually people who start out with this sense of, I'm going to go deep on the one or two things that I really care about. And I'm going to go deep on the things that I'm really, really passionate about. And I'm going to build a thing based around what I value, not around
Wow.
what someone tells me I should value, but around what I value.
Incredible. Terry Bruner, sir, thank you so much again.
Thanks, Evan. Appreciate you.
Awesome. Also appreciate you. That's it for today's Blueprint to Billions. If you're leading a mission-driven organization and want to break into HUD-backed development with confidence, visit terrybrunerlaw.com to learn more. And if you're an attorney who's passionate about impact but tired of the big firm model, the niche practice shows you how to build focused, profitable, and legal business your way. Learn more at thenichepractice.com. Share this episode with a nonprofit leader or attorney in your circle, and make sure to follow the show for more real conversations in intersection of legal strategy and scale. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.